So Nintendo just released a new HD remaster of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. I love The Legend of Zelda. It's one of my favorite video game series. I grew up with it. And after completing Skyward Sword HD, I thought, you know what? I want to compile all my thoughts onto one tier list. The best way to sort your thoughts. And I do have a few disclaimers. I'm using a stream layout here. This is how it would look if I was streaming on Twitch. I am not doing that right now because it is 3:57 a.m. Eastern Time. I just got bored and I was like, you know what? Let's just do it right now. Second disclaimer is that I am not going to include story spoilers or like very specific spoilers. I know you're probably thinking, well, these games are like so many years old. You know, a lot of them are like decades ago. But here's the thing. Breath of the Wild introduced a plethora, a renaissance of Zelda fans. If it's so easy for me to avoid, if it's so easy for me to be courteous, you know, why wouldn't I be? And third disclaimer, I'm going to not rank the remasters separately. You can just imagine it's your favorite version of that particular game so that you can be happier or more upset depending on how you want to perceive it. I thought it would make sense if I just discussed the Zelda games in chronological order, and I also included a few spin-offs at the end that I just felt like commenting on. And because of that, like I said, we're going to start with The Legend of Zelda on the NES, but we're also going to include The Adventure of Link. I have not played enough of either game. I have played them, but I didn't really get far in either of them. I just haven't really been that motivated to go back and play them through. They are pretty archaic compared to what you'd expect out of Zelda now. I'm a fan of 2D Zeldas, but nowhere near as I am for 3D Zelda games. So you're going to see a trend here where the 2D Zelda games are going to rank a bit lower or just end up in this blue tier right here. So I just want to get that up front. So here we go. This is going to be the first detailed discussion of a Zelda game, and it's going to be a little bit controversial. The next game is A Link to the Past, and I'm going to put it in C tier for now. For now, I might bump it up. So here's the thing. A Link to the Past is a great game, especially when it came out. The leap from the OG Zelda to A Link to the Past, because if you didn't know, Adventure of Link, it is called Zelda 2, but it's very different. It's a 2D platformer. Link to the Past was the first actual successor to what we are now used to with The Legend of Zelda, and just that step up was incredible. And to have a game to really evolve the Zelda formula, as well as just be so consistently good on the Super Nintendo, like, I actually envy people who grew up around that time, and to have this video game be one of the first video games I ever played, it's just, again, it's just so solid from start to finish. It's probably the most consistent Zelda game in terms of its gameplay. You know, some of the dungeon design is a little annoying. You know, it's still an older game, so it's going to be inevitable. And also, like, the difficulty is pretty hard. This is one of the harder Zelda games, and I would say there were moments where I was like, alright, this is a little much, a little excessive with the amount of enemy spam or what have you. Besides those few nitpicks, I think the gameplay of Link to the Past, you can't go wrong, honestly. But here's why it ranks in C tier, for me. It's because The Legend of Zelda has grown to become a lot more than just good gameplay, right? A lot of people love The Legend of Zelda. A lot of people are so attached to Zelda because of the stories it tells, the characters it features, the lore, the music, basically so much outside of the actual gameplay. And Link to the Past does succeed in a few of those, like the music is great. There's just so much more the other Zelda games have to offer comparatively. Again, probably going to be controversial to a lot of people, but I don't really care. It's my tier list. It's fine. Next up is The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. We'll put it here for now. I know some people are going to be upset just based on that selection because, you know, the graphical style of the remake has turned a lot of people off. Personally, I really love it. That art style, I just kept playing that game. I was just flabbergasted at how beautiful that game was. I really adore that art style. The frame rate does chug a little for some reason. I don't know why they didn't just have a locked 30 frames per second. It probably isn't as divisive as it was when it first came out, but it still is divisive. But even past that, there were two common opinions that I would see about Link's Awakening before I played it. Number one, a lot of people's favorite Zelda game was Link's Awakening, or at least one of their favorites was Link's Awakening. A lot of those same people were not as kind to the remake. The other common opinion was that, straight up, this game hasn't aged well. And I lie in the center of that. Kind of a mix. I do agree that the dungeon design is not up to par these days. But I do really like this game, but specifically the remake. Because the remake, naturally, has a bunch of quality of life changes. If it were not for those quality of life changes, this game would be even more annoying to play through those dungeons that I agree to be a little outdated. I just couldn't see myself having the patience to sit through the OG version of the game. I actually did enjoy Link's Awakening more than A Link to the Past. It's just incredibly charming. This is one of the most charming Zelda games. One of the most charming games I've ever played, quite frankly. It's so weird with all the references. It's still so distinct all these years later. There's no other game like Link's Awakening. I did enjoy the gameplay a lot, regardless of its age. And add the uniqueness on top of that, I just ended up enjoying it more than A Link to the Past. I gotta be honest. Even though I will admit that A Link to the Past is probably the better game. Now keep in mind, I will probably bump up these two games as we progress on with the tier list. These are just placeholders. And it's kind of awkward to have both of these fan favorites in C tier, so I just wanted to clarify that. Next up is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. This was the first 3D Zelda game, as well as one of my first video games ever played. It might bump up to S. Ocarina of Time has seen so much praise. And that's because it's a great video game. I was talking about how A Link to the Past, I envied people who played that as their first video game, but honestly, I had it pretty good with Ocarina of Time. That game is also very consistent with its quality. Some people, including myself, we don't really appreciate it as much as we should. With so many other Zelda games out now, you might look back on it and find it kind of standard, kind of typical. It just doesn't have as many of those unique factors in hindsight. But as I've grown up, I started to appreciate Ocarina of Time specifically a lot more than I originally did. I still loved it when I was a kid, but I was like, yeah, Majora's Mask though was always the one I loved. But then Ocarina of Time, I just started to really think about it and put it into perspective. Because the reason why I think it doesn't stand out as much as Majora's Mask or Link's Awakening or other ones is because so many Zelda games have tried their best to replicate Ocarina of Time's magic. But not only that, it's because Ocarina of Time laid the foundation of Zelda lore and Zelda culture. So for example, Ganondorf. Ganondorf, a fan favorite. People keep wanting Ganondorf back. He originated in Ocarina of Time. The Dekus, Gorons, Zoras, Gerudo, those are all integral staples to the Zelda franchise. Where they all originate? Ocarina of Time. And yes, I know, Zoras were in the series before that, but the iteration of Zoras that we know, the version of Zoras that we have all been endeared to, from Ocarina of Time. Just so many things about Zelda that we're used to loving and we're used to expecting and we're used to wanting, that all started with Ocarina of Time. And you can't overlook that. Even though by comparison now it might not stand out as much, we just have to keep in mind that it all started with this game. The originality of Ocarina of Time was incredible. The fact that they were able to set up pretty much the future of the series in so many ways. And not only that, just look at the gameplay mechanics. The Z targeting or L targeting. That is so crucial to 3D Zelda games now. it's crucial to other 3D games in general. Not only just for the Zelda franchise, but just for gaming in general. It really just set up the future. It really pushed gaming to where it is today. Now, I was talking about how Link to the Past and Link's Awakening were a bit aged in some respects, but I sincerely believe Ocarina of Time still holds up today. Yeah, sure, isn't as refined as the modern 3D Zelda game. I mean, that's just gonna happen because that's we would hope that video games get a bit more refined as the years go on, but even still, Ocarina of Time holds up so well, especially for an N64 game. Like, if you look back at, like, Mario 64, look, whether or not you love that game, I don't really care. The controls of that game, the camera, did not age that well. Ocarina of Time, though, you could play that game almost as if it came out today. Just with how many factors, the scale of that game, it being the first 3D Zelda, having all these new ideas, gameplay and story-wise, the fact that this game still holds up as well as it does, it really is remarkable. And even though it isn't as comparatively unique nowadays, the story is still iconic. I mean, that time skip is still one of the best Zelda story threads. You know, it has a very famous plot twist that we take for granted now because everybody knows the spoiler now. But just think about how cool that was. Like, think about if you weren't spoiled about that. That was so cool. I pointed out Ganondorf specifically, but let's talk about other memorable characters. Darunia, Saria, Princess Ruto, Mido's dumbass. Like, there's just so much that still is so charming about this game. So gripping narratively as well. You know, if you don't like that water temple, just play the 3DS version, alright? The 3DS version, I did not play, but I'm sure, based on everything I heard, everything I've seen, it's just a better version of Ocarina of Time. I mean, that just pretty much solves it all. I don't know what to tell you. Just, again, if it's not one of your favorites, you just have to recognize that this game hit on all cylinders. Next up, we have the sequel to Ocarina of Time. This, for a long time, was my favorite Zelda game ever. And that is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. I'm going to put it right next to Ocarina of Time for now. Here's the thing about Majora's Mask, though. I was talking about how I started to appreciate Ocarina of Time more as the years went by. I kind of had the opposite effect on Majora's Mask. And I'll explain why. Let's just get the kind of the negatives out of the way that I find. And there are indeed negatives, because here's the thing. First, Majora's Mask is like a quintessential example, there it is, of a game that is generally considered to be great on the internet. And because everybody has just simply agreed that it's great, its flaws, its rougher edges are just kind of ignored. There's other examples that we'll get to later where a game is considered not as good, so all of its flaws are really emphasized. Majora's Mask is not that by any means. Majora's Mask definitely has rough edges and like weaker parts to it that people just conveniently ignored because the strengths are so great. And while the strengths are so great, I think it's very important to still acknowledge those rougher aspects. The time mechanic in Majora's Mask, I like it a lot, but I do acknowledge that changing it in the 3DS version, making it more easy to change the time, making it easier to save. If you're playing Majora's Mask for the first time, there's like no reason that you should play the N64 version. I know it's going to be controversial to say because the 3DS version is pretty divisive for the Majora's Mask veterans because it made a lot of changes. It was probably the Zelda remaster that made the most changes. It changed like the boss battles. It changed like some of the mechanics like Zora swimming. You can argue whether or not it was for the better. But, I mean, come on. For a newcomer of Majora's Mask, they're not going to care about all that other stuff. They're going to care about whether or not it's accessible. I think it's just that Majora's Mask veterans, like myself, are just so used to the lesser aspects of Majora's Mask that we just overlook how a first-time player would feel. The lesser parts of Majora's Mask disappointingly, is also the dungeons. Dungeons are a huge part of Zelda games. There's only 4 dungeons in Majora's Mask, which is fine, you know? If they're gonna have 4 great dungeons, that's completely cool with me. Or like be like Breath of the Wild, where the 4 dungeons are like maybe not too great, but there's like 120 shrines to make up for it. You know, just something like that. But Majora's Mask's dungeons are very underwhelming. I do not find any of those dungeons to be that great. The only exception that I would consider is Stone Tower Temple, just because of how cool the gimmick of turning the dungeon upside down is. Like, that's really cool. But even with Stone Tower Temple, the fact that you have to climb up to the temple in the first place by playing songs over and over on those stupid switches and hoping you don't fall off and have to start over again. Like, I wasn't even planning on complaining about that, but that it is a prime example of how people, just because the game is accepted to be good, people will ignore the fact that that part and other parts are just straight up stupid. That climb the Stone Tower Temple, who honestly enjoyed that? Nobody did. That's why Stone Tower Temple, to me, is still not a great dungeon. There are no great dungeons in Majora's Mask. I cannot believe Beneath the Well is an acceptable part of a Zelda game. You're just going through a maze, but each door you have to give an item to a Gibdo. Basically like a fetch quest if you don't have those items on you already. Does that sound like something you want to do? No, it's not. That sounds stupid. That sounds like a waste of your time. That sounds like you probably just want to look up a guide for, right? Why is it that nobody complains about that anymore? It's literally like the worst part of a 3D Zelda game, just because it is so transparent on wasting your time. Like, it doesn't even try to hide the fact that, yeah, we wanted to make this game a little bit longer. We didn't have a better idea, so here you go. Like, it's just so baffling to me. Also, the Zora eggs. I don't dislike the Zora eggs, but even a good chunk of that is in Pinnacle Rock, where you're just killing the same few enemies over and over. You have to, like, not really guess where the eggs are, but it is still kind of a tedious part of the game. The Zora eggs are just not that well designed of a part of the game, considering the time mechanic and the uncertainty of where exactly they're located. I do like the Pirate's Fortress, but, like, I don't envy anybody who is doing the Zora eggs for the first time, is basically what I'm saying. It's just so uneven in its main adventure. But it's just conveniently forgotten. Conveniently forgiven. But you know what? It's still high up. Because Majora's Mask, what it does right, it's just so wonderful, so unique. Like Link's Awakening, so distinct even today. I'm not going to go too deep as to why Majora's Mask is so great, because you probably heard why, but here's just a few highlights for me. The mask transformations. Being able to play as the fan-favorite species, Deku, Goron, Zora, and having it actually be fun, one of the best gimmicks, in my opinion, for a Zelda game. I would not mind if they did the same thing again. The time mechanic, even though it can be kind of a pain in the butt in certain situations, the fact that the 3-day cycle allows these characters to have specific, unique schedules that change depending on whether you're doing your side quest, whether you did another side quest. It's just so cool. And the side quests, still the best Zelda side quests. You're really playing Majora's Masks for the world and the side quests. I mean, what other Zelda game goes into themes like grief and hopelessness as much as Majora's Mask? Really, when it comes to character moments and just the themes they explore, Majora's Mask easily one of the best Zelda games. The gameplay, like I said, while it isn't necessarily bad by any means, it does have weaker moments when you compare it to, say, for example, Ocarina of Time. But I still hold it in very high regard because nostalgia, but also because what it does right, it just knocks out of the park. It goes the distance and beyond when it comes to what it succeeds in. And to a certain extent, that's why I do think those weaker parts should be forgiven, but I'm not going to forget them, which is the main point I was trying to get across. Now let's cool down a little bit. We're going to have 3 games that I'm adding to the blue tier because I've played the Oracle games, but I was very young and don't remember much of it. And I have never played the original 4 Swords. So, the Oracle games, I will say, even though I don't remember much, if I were to play them today, I do not have much faith in them ranking high. They'd probably rank on the bottom ends, if I'm going to be honest. I've just heard and seen things which lead me to believe that the dungeons have aged even worse than Link's Awakening. The next Zelda game is another internet darling, a fan favorite, a herald of the Zelda fandom on the internet, and that is The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, which I am placing in B tier at the moment. If we were to solely consider the original versions of each 3D Zelda, I would unapologetically call The Wind Waker the worst 3D Zelda, because I'll narrow it down to 4 major reasons. Number 1, imagine a video game. Any video game. How do you change directions, right? You just kind of do it. You just point the control stick. It's a very frequent, simple action in video games, typically. Now, changing directions in The Wind Waker while you're sailing requires you to play a song, and then you watch Link play that same song, and then you choose a direction, and then you can finally go in that direction. Because if you don't change directions while you're sailing, you're going to go very slow. So having to play that song to do such a basic, recurring action, it just slows down the pace so much, especially when you don't want to slow down the pace while you're exploring, especially, right? You just want to see something in the distance and then be like, oh, let me go to it. You don't want to think, oh, okay, let me play the song first, and then now I can go to it. It's like how people complain about the rain in Breath of the Wild, because, it'll slow down your progress in exploration. It's like that, except changing the directions is just fundamental to the exploration of Wind Waker. The fact that the game is called The Wind Waker, but Waking the Winds is not fun. It's just tedious. That pretty much just sums it up right there. Reason number 2 is the least major reason, but I figured I'd bring it up because I do think about it a lot when I replay the game. So, the Great Sea is the best overworld in a Zelda game in terms of exploration, aside from Breath of the Wild. And a lot of people love this game for that reason. But whenever I replay the game, I'm always reminded that it isn't as good as I remember it. So, for example, if you look at the islands, there are 49 islands in total. But if you look at a lot of them, like the fact that there's 6 eye reefs. Why are there 6 eye reefs? 6 out of 49 islands are just the same islands, but a tad different. And they're not even that interesting to begin with. They're just like brown rocks and a couple ships. It's just like filler at that point. And even past that specific example, a lot of the islands are just either really small or they're not, like, they only have like 1 or 2 short puzzles to do, and then you just move on and you never think about it ever again. And of course there's other stuff in the ocean for you to discover. There's submarines, there's those little rafts, but to have 49 islands and have a lot of them be kind of like forgettable, it's pretty disappointing. And it's very noticeable if you're to replay the game, or even just playing it for the first time. Now that's especially Breath of the Wild's out, you'll be like, okay, I guess that's all there is here. Number 3, like Majora's Mask, the dungeons are whack. Okay, they're not bad. They're better than Majora's Mask. But just overall, they're alright. I mean, 3 of those dungeons, you have to play a song over and over, just like you do when you sail. I don't understand why they thought. I mean, I get that the music side of Zelda is so important. I love when you play a Zelda game and you have an instrument to play, but why did it have to be just so redundant? They did not have to make you play a song every time you wanted to do something. Something that should be simple. Something that just should be a button. Last but not least, reason number 4 is an infamous part of the game that for some reason is nowhere near as infamous as it used to be, and that is the Triforce quest. Now, this is probably the closest thing I'm going to get to spoilers. It's not story spoilers. I'm just explaining this part gameplay-wise very specifically. So I will warn you on that. So the Triforce quest, you have to find the 8 Triforce shards. It's not like you just have to locate them. No, you gotta go through a bunch of hoops before you even get to the Triforce shard itself. You have to find one map per Triforce shard. Then you have to grind a shit ton of rupees to transcribe each individual map. And then you can use each individual map to find the individual Triforce shards. To give you an idea, if you've never played the game, you have to grind over 3,000 rupees. Does that sound fun to you? Does that sound like good game design? No, it doesn't. It shouldn't. I hope not. It'd be different if the game introduced it earlier and was like, okay, you can do this at your own pace, but just so you know, you have to finish it before the final dungeon. If it was like that, this would be honestly not much of a problem. But the fact that it just comes out of nowhere, this over 2 hour long process, just out of nowhere, like, hey, just do all this for us real quick. I know the momentum's gonna be kind of halted, but just do it. It'll be fun, right? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but Nara, it was improved in the HD remaster. And yes, I will agree. That's why I say, if we're talking OG versions, that this would be the worst 3D Zelda. The HD remaster did wonders. They added a swift sail where you can just go fast whatever direction. And not only do you go fast, you go faster, a lot faster than you do in the original version. Which, again, I want to point out that they added an item that just completely negates the title, The Wind Waker. And then they also made the Triforce quest, like I said, easier. I think 3 of the Triforce shards you don't have to get the map for, which means you don't have to grind rupees for. And I think the rupees you need to transcribe a map is just less. But even then, that does not make that part of the game good. It still takes hours. It's still a monotonous part of the game. It wasn't enough to make me put it in the A tier alongside Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. But now that we're done talking about the negatives, now that I've lost all your guys' trust, let's talk about the good parts. Because Wind Waker, there's so many people who will look at it and will dismiss it as like a children's game. But Wind Waker, its story, it goes pretty deep. It goes pretty dark. Not like Majora's Mask dark, but from where you start in that game to where you end, damn, it goes places. It's my second favorite Zelda, if we're considering just the story. The character designs, the aesthetic, just the overall vibe of the game makes you feel good. Even when it's getting deep and dark, like I said, you still feel good. Even when you're going through the lesser parts of the game, you're feeling good because you're playing the Wind Waker. There's just a magic. This kind of like indescribable wonder of Wind Waker. So despite all the grievances that I have with it, the fact that it's so irreplaceable, it deserves to be at least in the first half of this tier list. Alright, so Four Swords Adventure, we'll be quick with this one. Four Swords Adventure, somewhere in D or C. I'll put D just because there's no games in there for now. The reason why, it's because even though this game is really fun in multiplayer, the setup is pretty demanding. So if you don't know, this is on the GameCube, and to play multiplayer, you'd have to get your Game Boy Advance and also the link cable for each player. And if that sounds like a pain, it's because it is. It is a pain to get everybody to get all their accessories out. So, you know, getting it to all work just doesn't happen often, which means most of the time, if you're to play this game or think about playing it, you're just not getting the true experience. You really aren't. And if you're playing this just single player, it's fine, you know? It's not bad. I would say it's still a good adventure for single player, but unfortunately, because it's on the GameCube and it required all that, it's just not a Zelda game I'd recommend at all. I have not played enough of the Minish Cap to fairly judge it. I enjoyed what I played, but Minish Cap is weird because it's one of those games where I acknowledge that it's good, but for some reason I just couldn't quite get into it. I couldn't motivate myself to keep playing it. Maybe if I were to play it today, it'd be different, but unfortunately, you know, that's just the state of things right now. Oh boy. Next game, I made an entire video essay about, a comedic video essay about, called The Worst 3D Zelda Game. And that is The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Please go watch that video if you're interested, if you're curious, if you're offended especially. If you're offended by this, go watch that video and tell me that I'm wrong. You'll honestly have a good time because it's a very funny video. One of my most hilarious videos that I've made. I'm very proud of it. It does have spoilers, so... Then again, it's Twilight Princess. You don't need to care about spoilers. But you know what? I'm glad Twilight Princess exists because it let us have a beautiful game called Link's Crossbow Training. No, I'm kidding. Link's Crossbow Training will go on the bottom. It is pretty fun, but it's fun for like a day. You know, it's kind of a game you play. You're like, oh, okay. And then you move on. Don't know what else to say about it. It certainly exists. Next up is one of the most hated Zelda games made by Nintendo. I recall myself enjoying it a lot, but there are things about it I will acknowledge are not so great. That is Phantom Hourglass. The most famous or infamous part of that game is, I think it's called the Temple of the Ocean King. Basically, after maybe a dungeon or whatever, you'd have to go back to this temple. You're making more progress as the story develops, but if I recall correctly, you had to like do parts of it over and over. It just was repetitive regardless. This, along with the next game, was a little like stupid with its controls. You have to like drag the stylus to move Link, and it was just a very stylus heavy game, which it didn't like control bad. It's just like that's not how you want to control a Zelda game, preferably. It didn't really add anything to the game, unlike the next game we're going to talk about. So the fact that you had to do that was just kind of unnecessary. And there's also an ocean to explore like the Wind Waker, but from what I recall, it's less memorable than that. I don't remember disliking this game as much as everyone seems to, but it definitely is on the lower ends of the Zelda games. Phantom Hourglass is a direct sequel to the Wind Waker, and then Phantom Hourglass had a sequel itself, and that was called Spirit Tracks. Spirit Tracks I did not play enough of to judge. I played about either a third to a half of the game. From what I remember, I think this would be a mid-tier Zelda game if I did play enough of it. So unlike Phantom Hourglass and Wind Waker, you're using a train to progress through the overworld. But the train, you know, you do get to control like the routes you take, but otherwise you're kind of just like waiting. You know, you can shoot things in the background, but it's kind of a slog to just kind of sit there. One of my favorite parts about it is your companion, which is Zelda. And this Zelda, her character, one of the best Zeldas. Her personality, her role, everything about her It's so great. That's why I wish I could go back and replay it, because that dynamic between Link and Zelda, the fact that Zelda is your companion is just such a good idea, and it was executed so well. Next up, oof, here we go. I'm going to have a lot to say about this one because it means a lot to me, and it just came out, so you might want to hear the most about it. That is The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. As of this moment, I'm going to put it ahead of Wind Waker, which might seem high based on what you've heard about this game. So if you guys have watched my Xenoblade retrospective, you guys know that when it comes to games, series, franchises that I'm invested in, I don't just automatically believe the popular opinion you see online. I'm not trying to be like egotistical, but I think it's a good idea to actually put in some effort and look at the context. Look at why people say these things. There are factors that have been overlooked, and I certainly do not expect newer players to know about them. So just to educate you a little bit, I guess. Now let's start off with the fact that before Skyward Sword came out, a lot of Zelda fans were starting to find the 3D Zelda games to be getting stale in terms of its formula. And they wanted it to be a lot more open in its design. Not only because the original concept for The Legend of Zelda was open, the original game is super open, but the industry was starting to shift in a direction where open world games or just open design was being embraced. You know, I can't blame people for looking at a game like Skyrim, which came out around the time that Skyward Sword came out, and then thinking, oh man, must be nice. You know, I can't blame Zelda fans for going into Skyward Sword and being disappointed by the direction it decided to take. And then the other reason that I want to point out, contextually, is that Skyward Sword came out in November 2011. Why is that important? Because by then, the Wii was pretty much dead. If you look at the sales of Twilight Princess, which came out at the launch of the Wii, Twilight Princess got like about 9 million units sold, if we round up. Skyward Sword, which was at the ends of the Wii, only sold 3.5 million. That's right, we live in a world where Twilight Princess sold over double copies that Skyward Sword did. Just want to throw up my mouth right now. But the reason for that, like I said, is because the Wii was pretty much dead. And the cruelest irony of this is that Skyward Sword, in many ways, you know, the motion controls, the hand-holding, those are all features that would appeal more to a casual audience that had already died by then. I just feel like that's so sad. If this game came out even a year earlier, it would have had a much more positive reception from the fans. But so what ends up happening is that the people who did buy this game are more likely to be those dedicated Zelda fans, the hardcore gamers. Yeah, we know what we're talking about. Our opinions are what matter the most. And we've already established that Skyward Sword did not really go in a route that fans wanted. So those fans are going to dominate the discourse online. I mean, they already do. When you see opinions online, most likely it's just a vocal minority of like the most dedicated fans, for better or worse. It's so easy to spread opinions on the internet that people, you know, they didn't play the game, so of course they're going to be like, oh yeah, these are Zelda fans saying this, so it must be true. So each and every flaw of Skyward Sword is going to be at its throat. Whereas games that are just generally considered to be good, like Majora's Mask and Wind Waker, those games are just going to let it slide. You know, even though Triforce Quest is longer and more tedious than anything in Skyward Sword, just let it slide. It's fine. It's fine. Even though Wind Waker has pacing issues, like people say about Skyward Sword, let it slide. Everyone loves it. It's cool. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying Skyward Sword is lacking flaws. I am not saying those flaws that have been commonly discussed are not valid. I do think some are more valid than others, and I do think a few of them are just ridiculous. But overall, as a whole, the criticisms that you've heard about this game are probably true to an extent. And I want to emphasize to an extent. Because here's the thing. Now that this HD version is out on the Switch, it has opened this game to so many new players, an entire new audience. And I've always felt this way, but now more than ever, after seeing people's reactions generally, having a good time with it, it's clear that all those flaws were greatly exaggerated. Because since they dominated the discussion, you would think that they are the reasons, that they are deal breakers. They make the game not good, apparently. But if that's true, then why are there so many people enjoying it? Now, to be fair, the HD version really helps. It doesn't make as many improvements as I thought they could have made, but overall, it makes the gameplay experience so much more smoother. The added button controls, I do think they do work well after that initial kind of like awkwardness. I should also mention that I've beaten this game 5 times, which isn't the most. The most that I've beaten a Zelda game is Majora's Mask, but you know, if there's anyone to ask about this game, it's me, alright? As I've said earlier, the fans were not necessarily expecting or wanting the change of direction that this game took, and that change was being more linearly designed and more story-driven. Now, those two qualities are not inherently bad. In fact, if you don't go in with these, like, strict expectations of what a Zelda game should be, I would say that those qualities are actually why the game is so good. Because the story is widely considered one of the best, if not the best, story in any Zelda game. It's my personal favorite. The characters overall have this like Wind Waker-esque quality where their design and their personalities are just so quirky. And also the main cast is so strong. The strongest main cast in any Zelda game. Just, you know, there's Link, of course, but there's also Zelda. There's Groose. Groose, one of the best characters in any Zelda game. Girahim, one of the best villains. The character work in this game and the story overall, just phenomenal. Like, if you don't care about saving Zelda in this game, then you just have no heart. You just should probably fix that. And then there's the linear design. Now, I understand when you play a Zelda game, you typically expect the exploration to be a lot more open. The way I would describe it, which isn't the most precise description, but it's just the easiest to visualize, it's kind of like the overworld itself is a mini dungeon. And I think the way the overworld is designed is really underrated because it introduces concepts, it introduces puzzles that they build upon, not only in that region and in that respective dungeon, but just throughout the entire game. And it does all that while not holding back on the characterization. You might think it might look too much like a video game level to be immersed in the actual world, but that's not true here. The design of the world, even though you're clearing obstacles constantly, doing puzzles, it still looks like an actual world. And it still has, like, lore, and the species in it are really just memorable to me. And that also applies to just, like, the overall puzzle design and the mechanics. Just so many original items and puzzle mechanics. Every time you think there's nothing else they can do with those mechanics, no, they just keep pushing it. Every item has way more uses, is way more versatile than you would normally expect out of a typical Zelda game, except for maybe the slingshot. So to sum it up, yes, it does have flaws. People will not let you forget that it has weaker aspects to it. But guess what? So does every other Zelda. Even your favorites, especially your favorites. But Skyward Sword is one of my favorite Zeldas, easily, because, in my opinion, the best story, best main cast, best collection of characters, some of the best puzzle mechanics, just so many, just full of fresh, original ideas that have gone underappreciated. It may not be the Zelda game that you want or prefer, but it's a damn good video game. Okay, after how long this video has been, I'm glad I haven't played these next two games. So, A Link Between Worlds and Triforce Heroes, both on 3DS. I said like a long time ago that I didn't really play that many 3DS games. Triforce Heroes, based on what I heard and seen, probably would be low. And then Link Between Worlds is one of my most wanted ports to the Switch. I would not be surprised if Link Between Worlds made it to my B tier, which says a lot because I'm heavily biased towards 3D Zelda games. Okay, I'd say this is the last big cojones. It is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, instantly going to S tier. The story is mostly set through memories, and even though I love those memories, I love the story it tells, it is kind of like disappointing that you aren't like actively playing them. And then also the dungeons, the shrines are great. I love the shrines, but the actual main dungeons, the Divine Beasts, they don't have as much of identity, or aren't as long as you would want them to be compared to the standard Zelda dungeons. But aside from that, I would argue, I don't know if I'd win this argument, but I would argue, I'm willing to argue, that this is the best game ever made. Everybody has their own story to tell by playing this game. And I just think that's so beautiful. When this game initially came out, and honestly, even somewhat now, it's just so great to share your experience about this game. It just playing the game. There aren't that many games that you can have just so much joy talking about what you did in that game. It is not an uncommon thing to say. If I were to wipe out my memory of one video game just so I can relive my first playthrough, it would be Breath of the Wild. Not even close. I envy people who play this game for the first time. And not only that, I would be so glad to watch them play it for the first time. I would be glad for them to tell me all about their first experience with this game. It is really a game that feels like it has endless possibilities. Even right now, even if you've sunk in like over 200 hours of this game, there are still things about it. You can find things you never knew could be possible in it. It's honestly, think about, I'm actually getting a little emotional talking about it. And I know I'm not getting into that many specifics about it. I'm really just talking about my overall feelings about it. That's just what this game does, man. It's just, it isn't about the specific mechanics. It's how it all comes together. It makes you feel a certain way that no other video game has ever made you feel. I'm legit getting emotional. Breath of the Wild is one of the few video games I would say is a must-play for everyone. Because if you don't enjoy it, that's cool. You have your own opinion, that's fine. But if you do enjoy it, it's something special. There's no other video game that will make you feel like how this game will make you feel. That's why it is a must-play for everyone. It's worth putting down that $60 because of what you will potentially feel with this video game. So that's the last of the mainline Zelda games. We're going to finish off with 3 spin-offs that I decided to talk about, because why not? Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, which I'm putting in C tier, which might sound ridiculous that I put this game over Twilight Princess and the rest of them. But look, I grew up being a big Warriors fan, okay? Musou games are my guilty pleasure. The only flaw that I found with Hyrule Warriors, Definitive Edition or not, is that Groose is not a playable character. I don't know why. They have all these fan favorite characters, but Groose, he's just not there. Why is that? Groose is like literally one of the most fan favorites in the Zelda franchise, but he's just not there. Other than that, one of the best Warriors games, or Musou games. But I will say, I did actually end up liking Age of Calamity better. I think probably as an overall package, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, the OG one, is better. Although I find the story, many people think this way, the story, it's not what we hoped, but I still found it to be enjoyable. And the gameplay itself, I find to be an improvement over the original Hyrule Warriors. The movesets, I've got to say, are so good. the movesets of these characters, it really made me appreciate the characters more after playing this game, which I think is a big compliment. Last but not least, it's kind of weird to end with this because I don't have too many feelings about this game. That is Cadence of Hyrule. Cadence of Hyrule is a good game, but it's not my type of game. I learned that just by playing the whole game. I do like rhythm games, but just the way this one works, I just wasn't that much of a fan of it. It's also like, I think, is it roguelike is the right term for that? I don't know. And even though I beat it, I don't remember too much about it. So, kind of a deflating way to end the tier list. I should probably rearrange this entire thing because I'm seeing some problems here. I think C and D have too many games in them. So, I think what we'll do, if we don't count Breath of the Wild, I do think these are my top 3. I do consider Wind Waker to be a step above these 2 games. Maybe we'll do this. I don't know. I really do think Wind Waker is in a tier of its own. I'm leaving it in B tier just to not appease the audience. And then we'd have something like this. I think... No. Phantom Hourglass gotta go in D. Thanks everybody who made it past this entire mouthful of a tier list. I hope you can respect my and everybody else's opinions. And I hope you get into the Zelda franchise a lot more if you haven't already done that. It's definitely, it's iconic, it's historic, it's legendary for a reason. I don't think, out of all these games here, I don't think there's an actual bad game. Even if people want to dunk on Phantom Hourglass, I still think it's like a mediocre game at worst. So, yeah. Get into Zelda if you haven't. I gotta go now. I am tired of recording, so go watch my worst 3D Zelda video if you haven't. Please, it's so worth it. It's better than this. You could have watched that one like so many times while you were watching this, so there's no excuse. Have a good one, guys. Share your tier list if you have one.